Let me start by saying this. The Traveler ended up being stronger than I calculated. The reason is actually pretty stupid. It's one little thing that Audioverse has never done before, and it seems like certain creators already knew about it, but the information was never made public. So let's understand how the Traveler actually works, how much DPS I thought they would do, how much they actually do, and why. I stream every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday on Kick, and if you find this video useful, please consider to subscribe to my channel. Alright, let's get into it. The Traveler's normal attacks have decent scaling, but there's nothing particularly special about them on their own. We'll come back to them later. The Elemental skill deals AoE cryo damage and then summons a little thing that follows the active cavities and deals cryo damage at regular intervals. These hits deal cryo damage and scale entirely with attack. However, if you are inside the Polestar field, in other words, if you are playing Stellar Conduct, this little thing following the cavity won't deal damage at regular intervals anymore. Instead, it will deal damage every time the on-field Traveler performs normal charge or plunging attacks. And that's why the Stellar Conduct Traveler is played on-field as a main DPS. By the way, one of the passive talents say that if you perform normal, charge, or plunging attacks while the elemental skill is active inside a Polestar field, those attacks will deal cryo damage and gain an additional 80% of the Traveler's attack. That's another reason to keep the Traveler on field. And looking ahead at two more passive talents, the Traveler can gain up to 160 elemental mastery based on 8% of their attack, reaching the maximum at 2000 attack. It also increased the team's base stellar damage by up to 7%, scaling by 0.35% for every 100 attack the Traveler has. So again, you reach the maximum at 2000 attack. Now, during the elemental skill, attacking on field gives you special stacks that enhance the elemental burst, up to a maximum of 8. We will get to that in a second. The elemental skill lasts for 12 seconds and has a 15 seconds cooldown. The elemental burst deals multiple instances of cryo damage to an enemy, which can become stellar damage with a different scaling, just like all stellar damage. However, for every special stack you have, the damage of those burst projectiles becomes stronger, and if you have all 8 stacks, you will fire 2 additional projectiles. The hits scale with attack, the burst has a 15 seconds cooldown, and it costs 60 energy. Now, there is still one passive talent left, and this is what makes all the difference. Whenever the team deals stellar damage in any way, the Traveler gains 1 ice charge. Let's call it that for now. You can gain 1 every 2 seconds up to maximum of 3 stacks. So you can easily get all 3 after about 7 or 8 seconds into your rotation. Once you have all 3 charges, you can perform a special charge attack, consuming all the charges to deal an increased damage equal to 140% of the Traveler's attack. That's pretty decent on its own, but if that attack is performed while you are inside the stellar effect, it will become stellar damage. You can do this once every 15 seconds. So the combo is basically use the elemental skill, perform 2 normal attacks and 1 charge attack, repeating that a total of 6 times, I believe, or you can just spam charge attacks, whatever you prefer, so that one of those charge attacks becomes the special one. Then you use the elemental burst and leave the field. As for the best artifact set, it depends on how you're playing the Traveler. For Stellar Conduct, the Traveler is an on-field cryo main DPS, so the best set is Disenchantment in Deep Shadow, with Attack Sense, Attack Goblet, and Crit Circlet. For Stellar Swirl, I will cover that in a different video. For substats, the priority is Crit, Attack, and Elemental Mastery. Some energy recharge wouldn't hurt either. Now let's talk about DPS. I previously said that the Traveler's base DPS was 21.7k. With this clarification, the Traveler's base DPS now is actually 28.8k, which is significantly better, but don't get too excited just yet. Let me continue. One of the teams I used with the Traveler was Jaime Kosiwon, Alosha with Scofia's weapon, and Adetta, where the team DPS was 107k. With this clarification, it goes up to 124.3k. So let's clear this up. The Traveler is not as strong as Zandrone. The difference is still pretty significant. The Traveler is actually slightly below Stellar Conduct Sinus level, whose DPS in the same team and with the same setup is around 128k. Now, one thing that changes compared to the video I made before is how we should look at investment. This is actually one positive thing about the Traveler. If you didn't pull for Zandrone nor her 5-star weapon, then a fair comparison with the Traveler teams, Jaesiwon, Alosha, and Adetta, will be, as I mentioned before, Adetta C2. Why? Because the Traveler and their 5-star weapon are free. So with the same level of investment, the Traveler team's DPS is 175.1k, and that's purely because of investment. Because keep in mind that even with Adetta's C2 huge buff, Zandrone still deals more DPS than the Traveler. However, the Traveler's teams can actually be stronger than Zandrone's team with the same level of investment. That said, the Traveler has a pretty significant problem when fighting more than one enemy. In that situation, Zandrone's team is way much better. And if you're wondering if Zandrone also had Adetta C2, her team DPS will be a little over 225k. But at that point, we're talking about much higher level of investment. Now, let's talk about why I got the Traveler wrong in the first place. The key information was private. There simply weren't enough public gameplay showcases, and nobody explained why the Traveler was actually so strong. Basically, all the content creators over the past month or so kept this information to themselves and never explain it. Even now, I think I might be the only content creator actually explaining the reason behind it. And honestly, that says a lot about how well these people are actually informing their audience. You see, all stellar hits we've seen so far are basically cryo damage that can become stellar damage with a different scaling. This happened with Zandrone, Jae, Diofli, Sinu, and even Adetta, who's coming in version 7.0. And whenever there's additive damage, an extra amount of the damage, it gets added at the very end of the entire formula right before resistance is applied. That's also how lunar damage works, which also turned out to be stellar damage. Let me give you a really simple example. Remember when people were saying Sinu was going to be completely broken? Well, that turned out to be false, because people thought that this would be 600% of elemental mastery as part of the stellar damage scaling, but that's not what happened. Instead, the value was added at the very end of the entire formula right before resistance. So naturally, it would be reasonable to assume that the Traveler's 140% attack will work the same way, but it doesn't. This time, Audioverse decided for the first time in the game that stellar additive damage will behave like normal damage. If that doesn't make sense, basically it's the equivalent of putting the cryo damage goblet to Zandrone because, hey, her damage is cryo, so you should use the cryo damage goblet. That's how ridiculous it sounds. But for some reason, the few people who actually did the calculations went against that intuition because they knew that piece of information that remained private until recently. No, in fact, if I hadn't asked a specific leaker about it, I never would have found out that data mining the damage showed that the special charge attacks 140% attack is actually added directly to its normal scaling, rather than being added at the end like is with Xenu, Lauma, Zibai, Iluga, and others. I was misinformed, guys. The leaks for this version were incomplete. The apparent reason? I initially thought it was some kind of liquor mafia or data privatization, but apparently it's because of security concerns since liquors are being hunted down. But seriously, would you really get banned for saying that the 140% attack from the passive talent is added directly to the special charge attack scaling? Was it really hard to say those two lines? Or are these creators just copying and pasting calculations from other people? Because if you don't know this, you can't calculate it correctly. I mean, whatever the reason is, the creator still ends up looking bad. And it's honestly unbelievable. Anyways, that's all for now. That's a lot of information about the Traveler. And that's it. We'll come back to the Stellar Swirl topic in another video. Until next time.